I'm Sadie, 26, sitting in a dim coffee shop on my birthday, staring at a text from my dad that cuts deeper than I ever imagined. "You're a burden, always have been," it says. My hands tremble as I grip a crumpled card from my mom, gone 5 years now. Hours ago, he and my stepmom threw me out of our home. Then I found their secret, an $18,000 Florence trip charged to my card. So I canceled it. What happened next? Stick with me. Where are you watching from? Hit like, subscribe, and let's share this journey. 2 weeks before that coffee shop moment, I was in our cramped Ohio home trying to make sense of a life that felt like it was fraying at the edges. I'm Sadie, 26, a graphic designer who traded city dreams for a bedroom in my dad's house after Mom passed. The place smelled of old coffee and Sheila's lavender candles, a scent I'd grown to resent. I'd been paying half the bills with my credit card, thinking it kept us afloat, thinking it made me family. That evening, I was folding laundry in the living room, the TV droning some reality show Sheila loved. Her voice cut through from the kitchen, sharp and unyielding. She was talking to Dad Arthur, her words slicing into me like a paper cut. She called me a freeloader, said my presence was dragging them down. I froze, clutching a worn towel, waiting for Dad to say something, anything. He didn't. Just a heavy sigh, then the clink of his beer bottle on the counter. My stomach twisted, a mix of hurt and disbelief. I'd been pouring my savings into this house, into them, and he couldn't even defend me. I slipped into the kitchen, later the linoleum cold under my socks. Dad was at the table, staring at his phone. Sheila was gone, probably upstairs. I cleared my throat, my voice smaller than I wanted. I asked if he thought I was a burden too. He looked up, eyes tired, and muttered we'd talk later. No reassurance, no warmth. Just a brush-off that left me standing there feeling like a guest who'd overstayed. I turned away, spotting an old photo tucked in a drawer as I passed. Me and Dad years ago, laughing at a county fair, cotton candy staining my fingers. I held it for a moment, my chest tight with a longing I couldn't name. My half-brother Caleb, 16 and lanky, caught my eye from the hallway. He'd heard it all, I could tell. His face was a mix of guilt and fear, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I gave him a weak smile, trying to keep things normal, but inside I was unraveling. Had I been blind to how they saw me? I went to my room, the quilt Mom made years ago, soft under my hands. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sheila's words. Freeloader. The word clung to me, heavy and wrong. I wanted to scream that I was trying, that I was caring more than they knew. But doubt crept in, whispering maybe they were right. The next day I decided to fix things. I'd plan a small birthday dinner, something to bring us together. I grabbed my purse, headed to the grocery store, and loaded up on ingredients for Mom's lasagna recipe, charging it all to my card. It felt like a peace offering, a way to remind them we were still a family. Back home, I started chopping onions, the kitchen filling with their sharp scent. Caleb wandered in, offering to help, his voice quiet. He didn't mention last night, but his eyes kept darting to the doorway like he was waiting for Sheila to storm in. She did eventually. Her heels clicked on the floor as she leaned against the counter, arms crossed. She asked what I was doing, her tone dripping with judgment. I explained, keeping my voice steady, saying I thought a family dinner would be nice. She laughed short and mean and said I was wasting money, acting like I owned the place. My knife stilled the onion half cut. I looked at her, hoping for a crack in her armor, but her eyes were cold. Caleb shifted beside me, his hands fidgeting. I wanted to snap back, to tell her I paid for more than she ever acknowledged, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, mumbling I'd keep it simple. That night, alone in my room, I couldn't sleep. Sheila's words looped in my head, mingling with Dad's silence. I felt like I was shrinking, like my place in this house was slipping away. I got up restless and started tidying my desk. That's when I found it, a stack of credit card statements hidden in a folder Sheila kept in the hall. My name was on them, but the charges weren't mine. Designer bags, spa days, a deposit for something big. Thousands of dollars siphoned from my account. My hands shook as I read, anger sparking in my chest. How long had this been going on, and why hadn't I noticed? I stood in the hallway, the credit card statements crumpled in my fist, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might wake the house. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, the silence of our Ohio home pressing against me. I wanted to storm upstairs, bang on Sheila's door, and demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the wood creaking under me. How could they do this? I'd trusted them, let them link my card to their accounts, thinking it was temporary, thinking it was family. The next morning, I woke with a headache, the statements still on my nightstand. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with questions. I needed to talk to Sheila to hear her explain this away. I found her in the living room flipping through a magazine, her coffee mug steaming on the table. I took a breath, my voice steady but tight, and asked about the charges. I held up the statements, pointing to the lines that didn't add up. Her eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me, narrowing. She said I must have forgotten what I'd bought, that I was always so scatterbrained with money. Her tone was smooth, like she'd practiced this lie. I blinked, stunned. I knew every purchase I'd made, every grocery run, every bill. These weren't mine. I pressed harder, asking about the spa charges, the deposit for something called Florence Dreams Travel. Sheila stood, her magazine slapping shut. She said I was accusing her of stealing, that I was ungrateful for everything she'd done. My throat tightened, but I didn't back down. I said I deserved the truth. That's when Dad walked in, his work boots heavy on the floor. He looked between us, his face unreadable. I turned to him, hoping he'd see the betrayal in my eyes, hoping he'd stand up for me. Instead, he shook his head and told me I was making a mess of things. He said I needed to stop playing detective and start acting responsible. Responsible. The word hit like a slap. I left the room, my legs shaky, and locked myself in the bathroom. The mirror showed a face I barely recognized, eyes red and tired. I splashed cold water on my cheeks, trying to steady my breathing. They were lying, both of them, and Dad's dismissal hurt worse than Sheila's venom. I'd always thought he saw me the way he used to when I was little, when he'd carry me on his shoulders at the park. Now I was just a problem to brush aside. Caleb found me later, hovering outside the bathroom door. He was holding a small folded piece of paper, his hands nervous. He slipped it to me, whispering that he'd made it for my birthday tomorrow. I opened it to find a hand-drawn card, a simple sketch of us fishing by the creek last summer, with "Happy Birthday, Sadie" scrawled in his messy handwriting. My eyes stung. I hugged him, feeling his thin frame tense, like he was afraid of being caught. He didn't say much, just that he didn't want me to be mad at him. I promised I wasn't, but my heart ached. He was stuck in this house, too caught between me and them. Back in my room, I sat at my desk, the card propped against my lamp. I tried to focus on a design project, but my mind kept drifting to those statements. I pulled them out again, spreading them across the bed. The numbers stared back, a timeline of theft I'd been too trusting to see. I found a charge from last month, a boutique I'd never heard of, and another for a restaurant I'd never been to. My anger flared, but so did a creeping doubt. Had I missed something? Was I wrong to confront them? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered, gnawing at me. I decided to check my online banking, something I hadn't done in weeks. The screen loaded and my breath caught. My savings, the little I'd scraped together for a future outside this house, was nearly gone. Charges I didn't recognize littered the account, draining what I'd worked so hard for. I felt sick, my hands trembling as I scrolled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. Sheila's voice echoed in my head, calling me ungrateful, and Dad's tired eyes refusing to meet mine. I closed my laptop, my chest tight with a mix of rage and fear. Tomorrow was my birthday, and I wanted to believe we could still fix this, that I could make them see me. But deep down, a quiet voice warned me the worst was yet to come. The morning of my 26th birthday, I woke to the smell of burnt toast and a hollow ache in my chest. Our Ohio home was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I'd barely slept, those credit card statements haunting me, their numbers seared into my mind. I wanted today to be different, to stitch us back together somehow. I slipped on my mom's old locket, its cool metal grounding me, and headed to the kitchen. I'd make breakfast, something simple, a gesture to soften the edges of yesterday's fight. I cracked eggs into a bowl, the whisk loud in the stillness. Caleb shuffled in his hair a mess and offered a shy smile. He grabbed the juice carton, setting the table without being asked. I could tell he was trying to keep things light, but his eyes kept flicking to the doorway, waiting for Sheila. I forced a grin, asking him about school, anything to keep the moment from breaking. The dining room looked pitiful, just one balloon I'd bought myself tied to a chair swaying in the draft. Sheila appeared as I set out plates, her robe tied tight, her face already sour. She surveyed the scrambled eggs and toast like they were an insult. I said good morning, my voice brighter than I felt, hoping to ease her into the day. She didn't answer, just poured coffee and muttered that I was trying too hard to be the favorite. The words landed like a jab, sharp and personal. I gripped the spatula, my knuckles white, but kept my tone even, saying I just wanted us to eat together. She snorted, her eyes rolling as she sat down. Dad came in next, his flannel shirt wrinkled from sleep. He nodded at the food, but didn't meet my gaze. I waited for a birthday wish, a hint of the dad who used to sneak me extra pancakes. Nothing. I served everyone, my hands steady despite the storm inside. As we ate, Sheila picked at her plate, then leaned back and said I was causing drama with all this cooking, that I needed to stop making everything about me. My fork stilled. I looked at Dad, pleading silently for him to step in. He cleared his throat and told me to let it go, that I was stirring things up for no reason. His voice was flat, like he was reading a script. Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it. I wanted to scream that I was trying to hold us together, that I was paying for their lives while they tore mine apart. Instead, I took a sip of water, the glass cold against my lips, and changed the subject, asking Caleb about his art project. He mumbled a reply, his shoulders hunched, caught in the crossfire. Sheila smirked like she'd won something, and I hated how small that made me feel. After breakfast, I cleaned up alone, the clatter of dishes drowning out my thoughts. Caleb lingered, drying a plate, and whispered that he'd overheard Sheila on the phone last night, booking a Florence trip for her and Dad. He said it was first-class expensive, and they'd used my card. My stomach dropped. I asked if he was sure, my voice barely audible. He nodded, his face pale, and said he didn't know how to tell me sooner. I hugged him, my mind racing. $18,000. My savings, my future, funneled into their escape. I found Dad in the garage later, tinkering with his old toolbox. The air smelled of oil and dust, the light dim through a cracked window. I didn't wait for an opening. I asked about the trip, my voice shaking but firm, saying I knew they'd used my card. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. He said I wasn't part of their plans, that I needed to stop acting like I had a say in their lives. His words cut deeper than Sheila's, each one a betrayal of the dad I thought I knew. I stood there, my locket heavy against my chest, feeling the ground shift beneath me. I left the garage, my breath shallow, Dad's words echoing like a slammed door. The Ohio dusk wrapped the house in a gray haze, and I found myself on the front porch, the wicker chair creaking under me. The air smelled of damp leaves, heavy with the promise of rain. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body felt anchored, trapped by a truth I couldn't unhear. He didn't just dismiss me, he erased me from their future. My fingers traced the locket, its edges worn from years of holding on, but even Mom's memory couldn't dull the ache. Inside, I could hear Sheila's voice, sharp and loud, arguing with Dad. The walls were thin, their words spilling out like poison. I wasn't meant to hear, but I did. Sheila said I was a burden, always had been, dragging them down with my neediness. My chest tightened, each word a blade. Then Dad spoke, his voice low but clear, agreeing with her. He said I was holding them back, that they couldn't live their lives with me in the way. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was too late. The betrayal sank deep, a cold weight in my bones. I stayed on the porch, the world blurring as tears burned my eyes. The street was quiet, just the hum of a distant car and the rustle of wind in the trees. I thought of Caleb stuck inside with them, and guilt twisted in my gut. He didn't deserve this either, but I felt powerless, like I was drowning in their rejection. I tried to picture Mom, her warm laugh, her hand in mine, But all I could see was Dad's back turned to me in the garage, choosing Sheila over his own daughter. Joyce, our neighbor, appeared on her lawn, watering her roses in the fading light. She'd known Mom shared stories of their book club days. She saw me, my face probably a mess, and crossed the street. Her hug was soft, smelling of lavender and earth, and for a moment I let myself lean into it. She didn't ask questions, just said I was stronger than I knew. Her kindness cracked something in me, a sob I hadn't meant to let out. I thanked her, my voice hoarse, and she squeezed my hand before heading back. But her words didn't fill the hole Dad had carved. Back inside the house felt smaller, the air thick with tension. I avoided the living room where Sheila was watching her show, her laughter grating against my raw nerves. I found Caleb in his room, hunched over a sketch pad. He looked up, his eyes wide, and asked if I was okay. I lied, saying I was fine, but my voice cracked. He didn't buy it. He said he'd heard them talking about kicking me out after my birthday, that Sheila had it all planned. My heart stopped. I asked when he'd heard this, my hands clenching the edge of his desk. He said last night after I'd gone to bed, his voice barely a whisper. I sat on his bed, the mattress dipping under me, and stared at the floor. The rug was faded, a relic from when this was Mom's house. Caleb's words confirmed what I'd feared, what I'd heard on the porch. They weren't just using me, they were done with me. I wanted to fight, to demand they see me, but the weight of their plan crushed that spark. I looked at Caleb, his face so young, so scared, and promised I'd figure something out. But I didn't know how. Dinner was unbearable. We sat at the table, the clock ticking too loud, the lasagna I'd made yesterday cold and untouched. Sheila complained about the food, saying I'd overdone it again. Dad didn't speak, his fork scraping his plate. I tried to catch his eye, to find any trace of the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, but he was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a problem. I pushed my chair back, my appetite gone, and said I needed air. Sheila snapped that I was being dramatic, but I didn't respond. I walked to the hallway, my hands shaking, and saw my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a stranger, hollowed out by their words, and I didn't know how much more I could take. The silence at that birthday dinner was suffocating, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Our Ohio dining room, lit by a single bulb, felt like a stage for a play gone wrong. I'm Sadie, 26, and I sat there, my untouched plate of lasagna mocking me, while Sheila's sharp glances cut through the air. Dad. Arthur stared at his fork, avoiding my eyes, and Caleb picked at his food, his leg bouncing under the table. The clock ticked louder than it should, each second stretching the tension tighter. I tried to keep it together, to make this night mean something, but the weight of their words from earlier crushed me. I cleared my throat, my voice shaky but determined, and asked if we could talk about the trip to Florence. I said I knew it was on my card, that I deserved to know why. Sheila's fork clattered onto her plate, her lips curling into a sneer. She said I had no right to question their plans, that I was lucky they let me stay this long. Her voice was ice, each word deliberate, meant to wound. I turned to Dad, my heart pounding, hoping for a flicker of the man who used to braid my hair before school. I asked if he'd really let her spend my money, if he thought I deserved this. He sighed, heavy and tired, and said I was making things hard for everyone. Then he looked at me, his eyes cold, and said I was nothing but a burden, always had been. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I gripped my locket, Mom's locket, so tight it dug into my palm, a sharp pain anchoring me to the moment. Caleb's chair scraped back, his voice cracking as he yelled at Dad to stop. He said I wasn't a burden, that I'd been paying for everything, keeping the house running. His face was red, tears in his eyes, and I wanted to hug him, to protect him from this mess. Sheila stood, her hand flashing out before I could react, slapping Caleb across the cheek. The sound echoed sharp and ugly, and he stumbled back, his hand to his face. I froze, shock rooting me to my seat, my mind screaming that this couldn't be happening. I stood my chair, tipping over, and begged Dad to do something, to say something. My voice broke, raw and desperate, but he just shook his head and walked to the living room, leaving me with Sheila's smug glare. She leaned in, her voice low, and said, I was never wanted here, that I should be grateful they put up with me. Each word was a knife twisting deeper, tearing at the last threads of hope I'd clung to. I followed Dad, my steps unsteady, the hallway dim and narrow. He was at the couch, staring at the TV, its muted glow casting shadows on his face. I stood in front of him, my hands trembling, and asked how he could say those things, how he could let her hit Caleb. I said I was his daughter, that I deserved better. He didn't look up, just muttered that I needed to leave by morning, that they'd already packed my things. My knees buckled and I grabbed the armrest to steady myself, the room spinning. I looked around, seeing my life in this house reduced to nothing. The photos on the wall, the ones Mom had hung, seemed to watch me, their silence deafening. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw me, but all I could do was whisper that I didn't understand. Sheila's footsteps came closer, her presence like a storm cloud, and I knew this wasn't over. My heart raced, a mix of rage and despair, as I realized they'd planned this all along and I was running out of time. Sheila's shadow loomed in the doorway. Her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. The Ohio house felt like it was closing in the air, thick with her contempt. I stood frozen, my plea to Dad still hanging unanswered, his silence louder than any shout. I'm Sadie, 26, and in that moment, I was a stranger in my own home, my birthday, a cruel stage for their final act. Sheila stepped closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and said they'd been waiting for this, that I'd been a leech too long. Her voice was venom, each syllable stripping away what little dignity I had left. I glanced at Caleb, still in the dining room, his cheek red from her slap, his eyes wide with fear. I wanted to shield him, but my own heart was shattering. Sheila turned to the hallway closet, yanking it open with a flourish. My bags, the ones I'd kept tucked under my bed, were there, stuffed and zipped, my life packed away like trash. She said they'd done me a favor, saving me the trouble of dragging it out. My throat burned, words failing me as I stared at the duffels, my clothes spilling out like a wound. I turned back to Dad, my voice barely a whisper, asking why he was letting this happen. He stood, his shoulders hunched, and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. The curtains swayed slightly, the fabric worn from years of neglect. He said I'd never understood how hard it was for him raising me alone after Mom died, and now with Sheila, he deserved a life without my weight. His words were a slow bleed, each one carving out a piece of the Dad I'd loved. I felt my locket against my chest, its weight useless against this pain. Sheila laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and said I should thank them for not doing this sooner. She pulled out her phone, scrolling with a theatrical sigh, and read aloud charges from my credit card. A new couch, her jewelry, their Florence tickets. She said I'd been funding their dreams, that I owed them for putting up with me. My stomach churned, the truth of their theft laid bare, not just money, but years of trust. I wanted to grab the phone to smash it, but my arms were led, my body betraying me. Caleb ran in, his voice breaking as he begged Sheila to stop. She snapped at him to shut up, saying he'd learn to live without me. He looked at me, tears streaming, and I couldn't speak, couldn't promise I'd fix this. The front door was open now, the night air creeping in cold and damp. Sheila pointed to my bags, her voice rising, saying I had 10 minutes to get out or she'd call the cops. My vision blurred, the room tilting as her threat sank in. I looked at Dad one last time, his back still to me, his silence a final betrayal. Rain started to fall outside, a soft patter against the porch. I stumbled to the bags, my hands shaking as I touched the handles. The zipper was stuck, a sock caught in its teeth, and that small, stupid detail broke me. I sank to my knees, my breath hitching, the reality crashing down. They'd planned this, used me, and now they were throwing me away. Joyce's porch light glowed across the street, a faint beacon, but it felt a world away. I was alone, my family gone, my savings stolen, and the rain was falling harder, soaking the world I'd lost. The rain soaked through my jacket as I stood on the lawn, my bags heavy at my feet, the Ohio night swallowing me whole. I'm Sadie, 26, and the door behind me was locked. Sheila's final smirk burned into my mind. Dad's silhouette faded from the window, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his words. I was shaking, not just from the cold, but from a fury I hadn't let myself feel until now. My fingers brushed the locket, Mom's locket, and I felt a spark, a whisper of her strength. Joyce's porch light cut through the dark, and I dragged my bags across the street, my shoes squelching in the mud. She opened her door before I knocked her face soft with worry. She didn't ask what happened, just pulled me inside, the warmth of her home wrapping around me like a blanket. The living room smelled of cinnamon and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile chill of my own house. She led me to her guest room, a small space with a quilted bed and lace curtains, and said I could stay as long as I needed. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and sank onto the mattress, the weight of the night crashing down. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying Sheila's phone, her voice listing my stolen savings like a trophy. I pulled out my phone. The screen's glow harsh in the dark, and called my bank's emergency line. My voice was steady, surprising me as I explained the unauthorized charges, the Florence trip, the years of theft. The representative, a woman with a calm Midwestern accent, listened, then guided me through, freezing my card. She flagged the account for fraud, saying they'd investigate. I hung up, my heart racing, a small victory flickering in my chest. They wouldn't get away with this. Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through the curtains, soft and unfamiliar. Joyce was in the kitchen brewing coffee, her radio humming a jazz tune. She set a mug in front of me, her eyes kind but searching. Over toast, she shared a story about her sister, how she'd walked away from a family that drained her, built a life on her own terms. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a fire that stirred something in me. I told her about the credit card, the trip, the way Dad had turned his back. She squeezed my hand and said I was more than their lies, that I could fight this. I spent the morning on Joyce's old laptop, digging into my bank statements, my fingers flying across the keys. The numbers were worse than I'd thought, thousands in charges, some dating back years, forged signatures I'd never seen. My savings were gutted, but the anger pushed me forward. I called the bank again, this time speaking to a fraud specialist named Marcus. He confirmed Sheila and Dad had opened secondary cards in my name, a betrayal so calculated it made my skin crawl. He said I had a strong case, that we could dispute everything. I took notes, my handwriting sharp, each word a step toward reclaiming what was mine. Caleb texted me as I worked, his message short but desperate. Sheila was packing Mom's old china, saying she'd sell it. My stomach twisted. Those plates, hand-painted with blue flowers, were mine, left to me in Mom's will. I texted back telling him to stay safe, that I'd handle it. My hands shook, not from fear anymore. I searched online for legal help, landing on a local attorney named Karen, whose website promised pro bono work for fraud cases. I sent her an email pouring out the story, my fingers hesitating over each sentence. I hit send, my breath catching, a quiet resolve settling in. Joyce peeked in, offering a sandwich, her presence steadying me. I looked at her, then at the guest room's window where the rain had stopped, leaving a clear sky. I wasn't just fighting for my money or Mom's things. I was fighting for me, for the life I deserved. The thought was new, fragile, but it burned bright, and I knew I wasn't done yet. Joyce's guest room felt like a sanctuary. The morning light now a steady glow through the lace curtains. I'm Sadie, 26, and for the first time in days, I wasn't just surviving, I was moving. My laptop hummed softly, the screen opened to Karen's reply. She'd written back within hours, her email concise but warm, offering to meet today at her office downtown. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I grabbed a notebook, jotting down questions about fraud claims, my handwriting firm, each letter a quiet rebellion against the life Sheila and Dad had tried to steal. I showered the hot water, washing away the grime of last night's rain, and pulled on a clean sweater one Mom had knitted, its soft wool like a hug. In the kitchen, Joyce was kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour. She asked if I was okay, her voice gentle but not prying. I told her about Karen, about the china, about Caleb's text. She nodded, her eyes bright, and said I was doing what Mom would have done, standing tall. Her words settled in my chest, a warmth I carried as I left for the meeting. Karen's office was a small, cluttered space in a brick building, the air smelling of coffee and paper. She was in her 40s, her hair pulled back, her handshake strong. I sat across from her, the wooden chair creaking, and laid out everything: the credit card charges, the Florence trip, Mom's china, Dad's betrayal. My voice didn't waver, even when I described Sheila's slap on Caleb's cheek. Karen listened, her pen scratching notes, her face a mix of empathy and resolve. She said we could file a fraud claim request, a restraining order against Sheila, and demand the return of my inheritance. Her confidence was a lifeline pulling me from the chaos. We spent an hour mapping it out, her desk covered in forms. She explained the process, the evidence we'd need, the timeline. I showed her the bank statements I'd printed at Joyce's, the forged signatures glaring in black ink. Karen said Caleb's testimony could help, especially about Sheila's threats. I hesitated, thinking of his scared eyes, but nodded. He deserved a voice too. As we wrapped up, she handed me a card saying she'd take the case for free, that stories like mine were why she practiced law. I thanked her, my throat tight, feeling a weight lift, not gone, but lighter. Back at Joyce's, I found Caleb waiting on her porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He'd snuck out his face, pale but determined. He said Sheila was boxing more of Mom's things, claiming they were hers now. My jaw clenched, a fresh wave of anger rising, but I hugged him, promising we'd stop her. Inside, Joyce made us tea, the mugs warm in our hands. Caleb's hands shook as he described Sheila's rage when she realized the Florence trip was canceled. I told him about Karen, about the plan, and his eyes lit up, a spark of hope I hadn't seen in him before. I opened my banking app, checking for updates. A notification showed the fraud investigation was active, my account locked from further charges. I exhaled, a small victory, but my eyes caught on an old transaction, a deposit I didn't recognize. It was from a savings account in Mom's name, one she'd set up for me before she died, hidden from Dad. $5,000 untouched. My breath caught, tears pricking my eyes. It was enough for an apartment, a fresh start. Mom had left me a way out, even now. I looked at Caleb, his tea untouched, and made a decision. I called a real estate agent I'd found online, scheduling a viewing for a small place downtown. Then I texted Sheila, my fingers steady, demanding she stop touching Mom's things, that I'd see her in court. She replied instantly, a venomous rant about my ingratitude threatening to ruin me. I read it, my heart pounding, then set the phone down. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I stood catching my reflection in Joyce's window, my eyes clear, my shoulders squared. The fight was on, and I was ready. I'm Sadie, 26, and the air in my new apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility, a stark contrast to the damp night I'd left behind. It was a week since I'd moved into the apartment, since I'd claimed Mom's hidden savings and moved Caleb in with me. The place was small, a one-bedroom downtown with creaky floors and a view of a brick alley, but it was ours. Boxes were still stacked against the walls. My sketchbook spilling out, a reminder of the life I was rebuilding. The morning sun slanted through a window, catching dust motes as I sipped coffee at a folding table. Caleb was at school, his first day at a new one, and I felt a pang of worry for him. My phone buzzed with a bank email, and my pulse quickened. The fraud team had reversed $12,000 of Sheila's charges, including the full cost of the Florence trip. A notification confirmed legal papers had been served to her and Dad, my fraud claim and restraining order now official. I set the phone down, my hands steady, but my heart racing, a quiet thrill at the justice taking shape. I opened a box labeled Kitchen, pulling out Mom's recipe book, its pages yellowed and soft. Caleb and I had found it yesterday, tucked among my things, and decided to try her pot roast tonight. I traced her handwriting, a looping note about adding extra time, and felt a warmth, like she was guiding me still. The act of unpacking, of claiming this space, was grounding, but my mind kept drifting to the court date, looming a shadow I couldn't shake. Joyce stopped by around noon, her arms full of grocery bags. She'd rallied neighbors for a fundraiser, a small collection to help with my legal fees, and the gesture hit me hard. She unpacked apples and bread, chatting about her garden, but her eyes kept checking on me like she knew the weight I carried. I told her about the bank's decision, the paper served, and she nodded, saying I was carving my own path. Her pride was a balm, but it didn't erase the ache of Dad's betrayal, a wound still raw. Later I checked my mail. finding a letter in Dad's jagged scrawl. My stomach twisted as I opened it, the paper thin and creased. He wrote that Sheila had manipulated him, that he hadn't meant those words on my birthday. He begged me to drop the case to come home, saying we could start over. His words were a plea, but they felt hollow, like a script written too late. I folded the letter, my throat tight, and tucked it into a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, not when his silence had cut so deep. I walked to the window, the alley below, quiet, a stray cat weaving through shadows. The city hummed beyond a world I was learning to navigate. Karen had texted confirming our next meeting to prep for court, and I felt a surge of resolve, but also a creeping dread. Sheila wouldn't go quietly, and Dad's letter was proof he was still caught in her web. I leaned against the glass, my reflection faint, and felt the gravity of what I'd started. The fight was real now, its consequences sharp, and I stood there caught in a moment of stillness, unsure what would break first. I'm Sadie, 26, and the courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale air, a place where truths were supposed to surface. It was a month since I'd moved into the apartment, since the bank had clawed back my money. I sat in a stiff chair, my hands folded, the weight of the moment pressing down. Caleb was beside me, his school tie loose, his fingers tapping nervously. Karen, our lawyer, stood ready, her briefcase open, papers neatly stacked. Across the room, Sheila sat rigid, her lips a thin line, and Dad was next to her, his eyes fixed on the floor. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses, called the case, her voice echoing in the quiet. Karen presented our evidence, her tone steady, as she detailed the forged signatures, the years of charges, Sheila's calculated theft. I watched Sheila's face, expecting defiance, but she leaned forward, her voice syrupy, claiming I'd approved every purchase, that I was confused, ungrateful. Her lie was so smooth, it chilled me, a performance honed over years. I glanced at Caleb, his jaw tight, and squeezed his hand, grounding us both. Karen countered with bank records, emails, my meticulous notes. She called Caleb to speak, and he stood, his voice trembling but clear. He described Sheila's threats, her plan to sell Mom's belongings, the slap that left his cheek red. The courtroom stilled, his words, hanging heavy, a boy's truth cutting through her facade. The judge's pen paused, her eyes narrowing at Sheila, and I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Sheila's face twitched, her mask slipping, and for a moment I saw fear in her eyes. The judge ruled in our favor, ordering Sheila to pay restitution, her voice firm but measured. The gavel fell, a sharp crack that echoed in my chest. Karen touched my arm, her smile small but genuine, saying we'd done it. I nodded, my throat tight, the victory bittersweet. I'd won back my money, my mother's legacy, but the cost was etched in the lines of Caleb's face, in the hollow space where Dad used to be. Sheila gathered her purse, her movements jerky, and whispered something to Dad, her eyes darting to me with venom. We filed out the hallway, bright and cold, the marble floor reflecting fluorescent lights. Dad approached his steps, hesitant, his face crumpled with tears. He reached for me, his voice breaking, saying he was sorry that he'd lost himself. His hands shook, and for a second, I saw the man who'd pushed me on swings, who'd bandaged my scraped knees. But the memory faded, replaced by his silence on my birthday, his choice to stand with her. I stepped back, my voice low, saying I needed time. His shoulders sagged, and he turned away, the distance between us a chasm I couldn't cross. Caleb and I walked to the parking lot, the winter air biting my cheeks. He was quiet, his hands stuffed in his pockets, the weight of his testimony heavy on him. I wanted to tell him he was brave, that we'd be okay, but the words felt too small. Instead, I unlocked the car, the keys cold in my hand, and we sat in silence, the engine humming softly. The victory was ours, but it left a bruise, a reminder of what we'd lost. I stared at the dashboard, my reflection faint in the glass, and felt the ache of justice, sharp and unyielding, settle deep within me. I'm Sadie, 26, and 3 months after the courtroom, my apartment felt like a home, not just a shelter. The Ohio winter had softened into spring, and the morning light spilled across my living room, catching the leaves of a pothos I'd hung by the window. I sat at my desk, a thrift store find, surrounded by sketches for a new client's logo. My freelance design business was growing thanks to Joyce's referrals, each project a small proof I was building something real. The air smelled of fresh coffee, and the lavender candle I'd lit a quiet ritual to start my day. Caleb was at school, his laughter echoing in my memory from last night's board game marathon. He'd started smiling more, his sketches filling our fridge, a sign he was finding his footing. I felt a warmth of pride in the life we were carving out, but a faint scar lingered, a reminder of Dad's absence. I opened my laptop, checking emails, and saw a message from a local gallery. They'd accepted one of my digital prints for a spring showcase, a piece inspired by Mom's love of wildflowers. My heart lifted a soft thrill at the thought of my work on a wall seen by strangers. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the moment sink in. For so long I'd been running from Sheila's cruelty, from Dad's betrayal. But here I was, standing still, claiming a space that was mine. Joyce called, her voice bright, inviting Caleb and me for Sunday dinner. She'd become a steady presence, her dining table a place of warmth filled with stories, and her famous peach cobbler. I said we'd be there, picturing her cozy kitchen, the way she'd hug us like we were her own. She wasn't family by blood, but she'd chosen us, and that meant more than I could say. I hung up my gaze, drifting to a small clay figurine on my shelf, a gift from Caleb, its uneven edges a testament to his care. The mail arrived, a soft thud against the door. I sorted through bills and flyers, then paused at a thick envelope, no return address. My pulse quickened as I opened it, finding Mom's china inside the blue flower plates Sheila had tried to sell. They were wrapped carefully, no note, but I knew Dad had sent them. My fingers brushed the porcelain, smooth and cool, and I felt a pang, not anger, but something softer, more complicated. I set them on the counter, unsure if I'd keep them or pack them away, their presence a question I wasn't ready to answer. I stepped onto my balcony, the city humming below, a mix of car horns and distant laughter. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs from a nearby park. I leaned against the railing, my sweater loose around my shoulders, and thought of Mom, her voice a faint memory urging me to keep going. I wasn't the girl who'd stood in the rain bags at her feet. I was someone new, someone who'd fought and won, but the fight had left marks. I closed my eyes, the breeze cool on my face, and let myself breathe the world quiet for just a moment. I'm Sadie, 26, and the Ohio spring was in full bloom as I walked with Caleb through a local park, the grass soft under our sneakers. The air carried the scent of cut clover, and the late afternoon sun painted the trees gold. We'd settled into a rhythm in our apartment, a fragile but real kind of peace. Caleb carried a sketchbook, his pencil scratching as we wandered, capturing the curve of a willow branch. I watched him, his focus quiet but fierce, and felt a swell of pride. He was dreaming again, talking about art school, a future I'd help him chase. We stopped by a pond, its surface rippling with the breeze. I pulled a small packet of wildflower seeds from my pocket, ones Mom used to scatter in her garden. I handed some to Caleb, and we sprinkled them along the bank, a silent tribute to her. The act felt small but heavy, like letting go of a breath I'd held too long. Caleb asked if I missed her, his voice soft, and I nodded, saying she was still with us in the way we kept going. He smiled, a real one, and I saw Mom in his eyes, her stubborn hope. We sat on a bench, the wood warm from the sun, and Caleb opened his sketchbook, showing me a drawing of the pond, the lines bold and sure. He said my designs inspired him, that he wanted to create like I did. My throat tightened, not with sadness, but with gratitude. I told him he'd be better than me, and he laughed, shoving my shoulder lightly. The moment was simple, but it anchored me, a reminder that we were building something new, something ours. My phone buzzed, a text from Karen. She said Sheila faced jail time for the fraud, her plea deal falling apart. Dad had moved out of state, no forwarding address. The news landed softly, not a shock but a confirmation. I didn't feel anger, just a quiet acceptance. The man who'd called me a burden was gone, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever look for him. Caleb watched me, his eyes searching, and I shook my head, saying it was okay that we were okay. We walked home as the sky turned pink, the city settling into dusk. I thought about the china still on my counter, and decided to keep it for Caleb, a piece of mom he could carry forward. At the apartment, I paused at the door, my keys jingling softly. The street was quiet, the world slowing down, and I felt a stillness inside, not heavy but light, like the first deep breath after a long climb. I turned to Caleb, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, and we stepped inside the door, closing softly behind us. I'm Sadie, 26, and 6 months after the courtroom, my apartment has become a quiet haven. The Ohio summer hums outside, cicadas singing through open windows, their song mixing with the soft scratch of my pencil on paper. I sit at my desk, a new one with clean lines, sketching a logo for a local bakery. The room smells of fresh linen and the mint plant I've managed not to kill. My life feels like it's mine again, built from small, deliberate choices. The walls are covered with my art, now vibrant prints that spill color into the space. I've started a routine, waking early to draw before the day begins, a habit that grounds me. Caleb's laughter filters from the kitchen where he's attempting pancakes, the batter splattering on the counter. He's 17 soon, taller than me now, and his confidence is growing, his sketches more daring. We found a rhythm, a family of two stitched together by shared meals and late-night talks. I pause my work, my eyes drifting to a small journal on my shelf, its leather cover worn from use. I've been writing lately, not just notes, but thoughts, fragments of who I'm becoming. The pages hold my fears, my hopes, the way I'm learning to trust myself. I flip it open, reading a line from last week about planting seeds in the park, how it felt like giving Mom a piece of this new life. The memory steadies me, a quiet tether to who I was and who I'm choosing to be. Joyce stops by most weekends, her presence a constant warmth. She brought a loaf of sourdough yesterday, her hands flour-dusted, as she shared stories of her youth. I listen, grateful for her, for the way she's filled a space I didn't know I needed. She's not Mom, but she's family, the kind you find when blood lets you down. I've started baking with her, learning her recipes. My hands clumsy but eager, each loaf a small victory. The gallery showcase happened last month. My wildflower print hung under soft lights. Strangers admired it, their whispers a quiet validation. I stood there anonymous in the crowd and felt a pride I hadn't known I could claim. My business is steady now, clients calling from beyond Joyce's network, each project a step toward a future I can see. Caleb's school sent a letter about his art, praising his talent, and I've tucked away money from Mom's account for his college fund, a promise I'll keep. I stand stretching and walk to the window. The street below is alive, kids biking, a dog barking in the distance. The world feels bigger now, less heavy. I've stopped looking for Dad's letters, stopped waiting for apologies that won't come. The china sits in a cabinet, a reminder of what I fought for, but it's Caleb's future that matters. I close my journal, the pages full, and feel a stillness settle, like the moment before a deep breath, ready for whatever comes next. I'm Sadie, 26, and as the Ohio summer fades into evening, I stand in my apartment's tiny kitchen, the light soft through the window. Caleb's at the table, sketching a mural idea for his school, his pencil moving with a confidence I envy. I'm stirring a pot of soup, the steam rising with the scent of rosemary, a recipe I've tweaked to make my own. This moment, simple and warm, feels like a gift, one I've earned through months of rebuilding. I think back to the night I stood in the rain, my world unraveling. I was so sure family was blood, that Dad's love was something I had to keep chasing. But now, watching Caleb hum softly, I see it differently. Family is who stays, who chooses you when the easy choice is to walk away. Joyce with her Sunday dinners. Caleb with his quiet loyalty, they're my people. And Mom, her memory woven into every step I take, taught me I'm enough on my own. I've learned something else, something harder. Forgiveness isn't about letting Dad back in or pretending Sheila's cruelty didn't happen. It's about letting go of the weight, the anger that kept me tethered to their betrayal. I haven't spoken to Dad, and I might never. But I've forgiven him in my heart, not for him, but for me, so I can walk lighter. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to their approval or anyone's. It's in the way I show up, in the lines I draw, in the home I've built for Caleb and me. Last week I found a small box in the closet tucked behind old sketch pads. Inside was a bracelet, silver and simple one Mom wore when I was a kid. I slipped it on its cool weight, a reminder of her belief in me. I don't need to carry the pain anymore, just the strength she left behind. Caleb looks up, catching my eye, and grins, his mural sketch taking shape. I smile back, my heart steady, knowing we're writing a new story, one where we choose ourselves. I set the soup on the table, the bowls clinking softly, and we eat together, the silence comfortable, full of unspoken trust. This is healing, not loud or perfect, but real in the small moments that add up. I'm not the girl who begged for a place in that house. I'm Sadie, whole in my own skin, and that's enough. What's a moment that made you realize your own strength? I'd love to hear your story in the comments to know what's carried you through. If this resonated, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who might need a reminder they're enough. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to healing, to finding your light wherever you are.